mind when I saw this for the first time about, you know, the many, many hours of filming that this filmmaker has in this, and just how she came to decide upon what ought to go into the movie is, I guess, within you know, her talent to think this is what should be captured. And as people such as yourself that have a lot of your own thoughts, I'm sure, on the war, on, you know, how it has affected you, and how has it affected many of those that you associate with.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Good.
When I watch it, I see 95% of the guys I hang around with in it. So, I mean, when I watched it the first time, I was kind of confused about what the topic was going to be. Was it a story about a veteran coming back with problems and working his way through them, and then the end with him bringing the kids back and all that, it kind of turned into an immigration piece, or you know, but this, compared to what was on the preview on the computer, this screening had more footage in it than the other one did, and I think it tied it in a little better, where he's finally, the stray dog is finally coming to terms with his past and trying to start a new family and move forward from there. So, you know, good luck to him, you know. But the things that they're on right with point that I see is that veterans, helping veterans, because, you know, the guys, I'm in a club that has over 1,000 members, and that's all we do, is help veterans, help each other, help outside sources. These guys do the same thing with the Patriot Guard riders. I mean, my understanding of their mission is more after the guys pass, but, you know, in the middle, you know, my daughter's an Iraqi and an Afghan vet. She's going through the same issues that I had when I came home from Beirut, which were the same issues my father had coming home from Korea and my grandfather had coming home from World War II. So when you watch it, it is a kind of a cycle, you know, that keeps going. And I find most people don't figure out, especially combat vets, how to move forward from that until, like me, well into our 50s, you know, or better, before they actually figure out the pieces to the puzzle. So.
What do you think, Bob?
You know, I'm a Navy veteran. Thank you for your service, Durwood. Myself, but I'm post-Vietnam. I served from 77 to 81, so I never actually served in combat. And what I can really relate to Stray Dog is never again. You know, what happened with the soldiers returning from Vietnam was despicable at best, and it goes downhill from there. They were pawns in a political game, and a lot of them suffered tremendously for no real gain at all. So, you know, I can relate to where he's coming from in regards to never again. You know, don't repeat the mistakes of the past. The other thing that I was that didn't come up in the film, but perhaps was in the background too, was veteran suicides. It's 22 a day. You know, that's a scary number, particularly when only 1% of our current population serves, 1%, and 22 a day out of that 1% pass on. So I think that, you know, he relates to all that. And as Mike said, I mean, you know, he went through a lot of, no doubt, a lot of trauma that, you know, quite frankly, I can't speak to. I haven't, haven't been there and done it, haven't walked that mile in his moccasins, so I can't really say I relate to it. But as Mike had said too, you know, a lot of the guys that I hang out with are very similar to that gentleman right up there. Very patriotic
What,
individuals.
what do you think about the Iraqi and Afghanistan warriors of today, and you know, in relationship to, you know, what they experience versus what happened, you know, in Vietnam, for instance? And, I mean, completely different terrains and things going on.
One of the best arguments I heard between a Vietnam vet and an Iraqi vet, and they were discussing the different battlefields, and the Iraqi vet looked the Vietnam vet right in the eye and he said, "All I can say is you guys had trees.
Yeah.
There are no trees in the desert to hide behind." It was actually the first time I seen that particular friend of mine without a comeback. So the kid shut him right up. It was pretty good. But I mean, I'm biased because, you know, my daughter served in Iraq. She did a tour in Iraq and a tour in Afghanistan. And I think the kids today are just as strong and capable and able as anybody that went before them, you know. We are fortunate that our military has the training and the strength, although a lot of people complain about this or that. But, you know, it's the aftercare that the United States has to work on. We have to work on the aftercare when they come back. And then we have to look at National Guard. My daughter was in the National Guard with the medevac unit out of Concord. When they come home as National Guard members serving overseas, they're not considered veterans in the eye of the VA. They're allowed a 6-month or a 10-month period of access to the VA, and I want to say it's like a year worth of mental health counseling when they come home. But once that tour date stops, they're not considered veterans in the eyes of the VA. They were National Guard, they're reservists, they're not eligible for the same veteran, but same combat zone, same tours of duty, but because they weren't full-time active duty service people, they're not eligible for the same benefits as full-time active duty guys, and I think that's ridiculous. I think anybody who serves in a combat tour in defense of the nation should be eligible to veterans care regardless, you know. That's my pet peeve.
So there's some political aspects still going on.
Yeah, well, you know, that's a pet peeve for me because, you know, I see what my daughter went through over there, and she wasn't in a safe area all the time, and we've had conversations, and, you know, I think they should be there more for these kids. And if you look at the two current conflicts with Iraq and Afghanistan, probably 70% of the participants in that and the kids that are going over there fighting are National Guard and reserve units, because the government, for whatever reason, has pared down the military so bad that they have to draw from those resources to send the kids over there, and that they're fighting, and, you know, it's like a part-time employee. You use them while you can use them, and when you don't need them, you cut them loose. And you know, and I personally don't like that, coming from a military family, you know, generations of military. So I think the kids should be taken care of whether they serve full-time active duty or whether they were active or.
Certainly, there's no arguing that the trauma and such that they're exposed to is no different than.
It's no different.
Than, you know, what the vets were, and whether it be Vietnam, Korea, World War II, World War I, you know, it remains constant.
Do you think that, you know, of the veterans, you know, particularly when you would take a look at the Vietnam vets, have acclimated as easily back into society as, you know, previous wars, you know, if you look at like World War II when they
I
came
think that
back.
we're more aware of it today, and I think it's talked about more. Whether they have actually acclimated any different than previous generations, I'd have to ask the question, what's changed about warfare or human nature that would allow them to acclimate back into society any better? Perhaps treatment has improved somewhat, but I think awareness is probably the big thing that's changed, you know, from, say, Vietnam to today's returning veterans. Awareness, that's huge, and perhaps that's helpful. Just you know, people being aware, sympathetic, you know, to the challenges that those veterans are confronted with. I don't know. Hard to measure. How would you gauge that?
Yeah, yeah. If you've seen some of the documentaries on World War II people, you know, a lot of that was hidden.
It absolutely was.
I just watched a documentary about, a PBS documentary, as a matter of fact, about the lost POWs. And it was something that even with the military lifestyle that I lead and the stuff that I read, I never realized that during the Battle of the Bulge in the Ardennes Forest, that captured American soldiers, when they were taken prisoner by the Germans, were actually segregated by faith. And the Jewish prisoners of war from the American services were actually segregated from the Catholics and the other branches and the other religions, and sent to death camps, where they were housed with European Jews, and they slaved and worked in the death camps. You know, but you never hear about that with the Holocaust. And the whole story was about a medic that got separated, and he was actually Hispanic, but to the Germans he looked Jewish. And he got separated, and as a medic, well, the whole time that he was incarcerated at that POW camp, he kept a secret hidden log. And he listed all the soldiers, what they came in with, what they died with, and he never told his family anything about it. And it was only towards the end of his life where he pulled the books out and showed them, and then the result of the documentary was all this stuff he saved actually got put into the Holocaust Museum in D.C. It was,
Interesting.
yeah, if you get Netflix, it's on there. It's a pretty good one.
But I think, you know, from the next stage, you know, from Vietnam up to, you know, today,
Yeah.
you know, we know that that when soldiers were brought back, they were hidden, and so the public, you know, wouldn't actually see caskets and that type of thing. They didn't want it to affect the support for the war. And today, you know, like in this movie, you see, you know, the complete opposite. You see them going out in Maryland, where, you know, where they come in, and that's publicized, so that the public does, you know, see that.
As it should be, without doubt or hesitation. I mean, you know, particularly those who, you know, have made the ultimate sacrifice. There's no honor or respect high enough that can be rendered to those individuals. That's just my personal opinion. And, you know, since we're on that topic and we're discussing it, you know, I'll express another opinion that I think Stray Dog there would support, that as a culture, as a society, perhaps those that we glorify as heroes truly aren't. And I'm not speaking of our military members. I'm speaking of our you know, sports figures, Hollywood people, singers, songwriters. You know, good example. Whitney Houston is glorified, but certainly the woman was popular and a talented and gifted artist, but
No role model.
that's a good way of phrasing it, Jimmy.
Yeah.
certainly not a role model as far as I'm concerned.
You know, how does that compare to somebody who goes out there and gives their life?
It doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't. There is no comparison.
Exactly.
I mean, you know, it just cut and dry. There is no, it doesn't even compare to the poor ground pounder in a foxhole someplace. You know, freezing his butt off and starving. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, it doesn't compare. But that's what we as a culture choose to glorify. Does it speak well of us? I don't know. Well, I shouldn't say I don't know. I don't think so. But that's my opinion.
One of the things that I thought I said, and maybe it's a wrong perception, you know, of people who were in Vietnam, you know, were out in the field for so long and so isolated, you know, from society, so to speak, that maybe somehow explains, you know, some of the things that went on.
Great point.
You know, they were under, you know, so much stress. I thought it was in this clip here, but I'm not sure, where one of the, you know, fellows talked about how, you know, from the time he was discharged, as soon as he would, you know, get out into an area where it was open or whatever, he was always looking around to see if, you know, what was going to come at him from one direction or another.
That never changes.
Yeah, and that's, you know, to understand, you know, being under that sort of stress for days after days after days, you know, how do you acclimate back to civilization, so to speak?
Great point.
I was in the infantry for 15 years. I did 5 years in the Marine Corps and 10 years in the Army, all straight leg infantry. And even to this day, I can't sit in a restaurant without having my back to the wall watching the door. I won't go anywhere. Any place I go, I check exits. I always look at exits. I always sit. So I'm strategic in everything I do. So that never changes, because that's your body's, once you go through that, your mind, it's a mechanism, and it creates a defense mechanism that you're always gonna have once you're experienced to that. And you know the quotes you hear, you know, the inhumanity of the man, you know what people are capable of, where the everyday citizen doesn't. And that, you know, you hear it all the time in the news. Wow, this neighborhood's always quiet. That never happens here. Oh no, they were such nice people. But, you know, when you go into a combat scenario where you have to be, you know, I worked as a prison guard for 22 years, and the reason I liked that job is because I had to be on my toes all the time. And it was a comfortable job for me coming out of the service, because I was already battle ready. So that was a good career for me. And that's why you see a lot of military people go that way, police, law enforcement, fire, because those jobs remind them more of being on active duty and doing those kind of things, and always up, down, around, you know, head on a swivel all the time.
I was thinking of a Secret Service agent.
Yeah, those guys, well, look,
where you need
those guys aren't exactly in the good light right now. They're having all kinds of problems.
But you know, just constantly vigilant.
Yeah, you're always vigilant everywhere you go.
You know, one thing that we haven't touched on are motorcycles. And how motorcycles are centric to a lot of the organizations that honor and support veterans.
One of the best lines in this whole documentary is when he said, "My motorcycle is my psychiatrist."
Exactly, the
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
wrist.
So just go out and ride.
Right.
How many motorcycles have
Well,
you
it's not so
seen
much-
parked outside a shrink's office?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
that kind of thing.
Well, most of us see shrinks, but we just, you know, we park the bikes around back. But, the thing about riding a motorcycle is, for me personally, you know, I'm 100% PTSD, so when I ride my motorcycle, I don't think about anything but riding my motorcycle. And you're always watching, you ride a bike, you're always watching for the other guy. If you're a good rider, you're paying attention, you're always watching. And one of the reasons why I enjoy it and why it reduces my stress so much is because I don't have the opportunity to have any intrusive thoughts while I'm riding my motorcycle.
You gotta pay attention.
You have to pay attention, you know, and I ride long rides. You know, I've been all over the United States on a motorcycle and most of Canada. And, one of the reasons, and I like going alone. I belong to a club and I ride with a club, but probably 70% of my riding is by myself because that's just what it is. It's less stress.
What about the camaraderie of,
You need that.
Of the club?
Your club can be a double-edged sword. It's just like any other club, a VFW, a ladies' club, a men's club. Every kind of organization, whether it's civilian or military, is a double-edged sword. You can either be the joy of your life or the, you know,
Bane of your
the
existence.
stress from the club can actually cause you more problems than without the club. So, I mean, I think anything like that is what you make it. If you go into it and you put something into it and you wanna make it a good thing and a healthy thing, then it can be. But if you're a narcissist and you wanna go in there and you just wanna stir up crap and make everybody miserable, cause that's how you survive, then an organization can be a bad thing. So, I mean, you see it, you all probably belong to some social club or another, and you can see there's the people that are always uplifting and spirited and happy, and there's the people that are always miserable. You just gotta make a decision which side of the fence you're gonna hang around with. So,
Do you think one somehow helps the other?
I know the veteran organizations that I belong with and the ones that I'm familiar with go a great way to bring guys out of their shell, especially younger kids now. One of the things that we run into it, as we're getting older, the kids from Iraq and Afghanistan are coming and they're seeing us and meeting us and learning what we're about. I mean, just in my club alone, locally, our membership is probably, the newer members coming in have dropped in age. We're getting kids in their late 20s, early 30s now, where, you know, most of us are 50 or better. So, and they see what we do and what we're about, and they realize it's not just you know, we're a social club and we have activities and we do things like putting floors in a Gold Star Mother House, or, you know, taking care of a police traffic circle, or doing food drives for a local charity, or, you know, we're a positive influence, you know. And then you get that time side by side where the kids know you can talk to them and say, you know, you're not the only one dealing with what you're dealing with. You know, guys, you tend to get a leadership role, and then you tell them, you know, well, I go and see the guy at the VA every 2 weeks. I see a shrink every 2 weeks, it helps me. And then they're like, well, if a guy like him can do it, maybe I should try it, and maybe it can help me. And I think that goes a long way into getting some of the young kids involved in the programs that are out there.
What about people out here that might have questions? If you're probably sitting there with something, say, why doesn't he ask this?
I don't know, I'm the daughter of an Army officer who's in the Army for 30 years. He was in Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia in the early 60s. He came home from the war and didn't talk about it. He didn't talk about it for a very, very long time. Very committed to the military, you know, really believed very strongly in his cause and his devotion to the country. But when I saw him go off to Vietnam, I was with kids in school, and it was a shaming thing. And it was very difficult to be the daughter of an officer knowing he was doing what was right, because he was being sent there by the government, but he believed in what he was doing because he was working with men and doing the best he could. And he was gone for a long time, and then when he came home, there was no welcoming, there was no celebration, there was no recognition, there was just more shaming. And as a kid going through high school, and my younger sisters, wherever we moved to, we just saw it all around us. It got to the point where you didn't even want to raise your hand in class and talk about what you felt about the war, or the experiences that the people were going through, or your father was going through, or the other soldiers he was with, because all you met was negativity. And it's uplifting in some way now that young men are going off to war, far away again, coming back very different, but at least they're getting some kind of recognition when they come home. It took a very long time. My father never understood why it wasn't there in the Vietnam War. And my dad's recently passed away, but I had talked to him over the last 10 or 15 years about all the different conflicts, and he had some really interesting insights into what was going on, but yet he still wouldn't talk about his experiences in Vietnam. It was very overwhelming. Things that he just felt were not appropriate to share with his children.
Yeah, that's really a kind of a shameful,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
part of our history.
And it is,
Yeah.
but it's still, I think to this day, we still need to talk about it. We need to learn from those experiences and make our young people know that it's very honorable to represent the government and do your duty for whatever branch you're going to serve. And these young men and older men give up so much of their lives and their families to do this, to fight for a cause that they believe in, that we really need to celebrate their accomplishments.
Yeah,
And you know, you hear the bad press, but it's not all bad press.
there were, I think, you know, in rural New Hampshire, I think after I had gotten out, and you know, in '67, the war was, you know, really still in full form, and I lived over in Hillsborough at that time, and actually worked in the same plant, the Sylvania plant, with a father of a young man. You know, I don't think he was out of his teens that went to Vietnam, and he didn't tell me this himself personally, but I, you know, heard, you know, from a friend, you know, him describe. He worked a late shift, and he actually had a small dairy farm that he did. He took care of at the same time. So he had, you know, gotten off the shift, you know, went home and milked the cows, and he was sitting at the breakfast table, and a car pulls up, and an Army officer gets out of it, and his priest.
Oh, gosh.
And, you know, and they actually, you know, closed that town down for his funeral. The shops closed up, you know, the stores and everybody.
As it should,
Yeah,
rightfully so.
yeah. But that's, you know, maybe that's probably somewhat rare, you know, what happened, you know, in that time period. But you know,
Yeah,
they knew this family, and they really, you know, appreciated, you know, the sacrifice.
Well, and much more recently than that I witnessed the same thing when Doug DiCenzo was killed from Plymouth, that the guard was there surrounding that family when you got near the funeral. It was beautiful. It was a protection from, you felt like you were in a completely different world. And, you know, who were these people with the flags completely surrounding his friends and family on the football field that he had grown up on? And it was beautiful. It was really, really, really beautiful. I was going to comment. I had a similar experience. My dad went to Vietnam twice, and my mother tried so hard to walk my brother and I through all of the rallies out at Fort Gordon, Georgia, when the guys were getting off planes, so we were there to cheer for them. We had our flags, but school was hard.
Oh, it's terrible.
Because that's where I
It was
got
terrible.
Mean Girls, and it was Mean Girls, but it was mean to a level that I think back now, and you know, why did they back me up against a wall and say, you know, your dad could die, couldn't he? You know,
Yeah.
and stuff. It was terrible.
The only support I remember feeling was when we lived in communities where we lived on the post. When I lived out in the civilian communities and we would go to the post, and I went to public high schools, it was hard. It was very, very hard. And I experienced it on both coasts. I'm not from New Hampshire. And I mean, I was out in California and Virginia and Maryland and all over the place during this whole thing. And it was very, very difficult. Even when I went away to college in the late 70s, the war had ended, but still it wasn't over. Nothing was over. it just kept going. And it's very, very different now, very different.
Another thing I think that the movie highlights really well, though, is, and I think it's true of, well, first I was going to comment, you talked about being on military bases, that I think maybe looking back at it, that's why my brother and I started going out to the movies at Fort Gordon, Georgia, because they had, and it's apparently not true today, but they had like 4 theaters because it was the days of film and no video, and that was everybody's nightly entertainment. So we were doing 4 theaters worth of nightly changing movies. And we'd ride through the post and we'd get saluted because we had my dad's stickers on the car and everything, and we'd go in. And it was a safe place to be because everybody stood up at the beginning of the movie when the flag came on the screen, and it was.
You said the Pledge of Allegiance. There was honor, but you didn't see that in a lot in the public schools from your peers and from your parents.
And it's only degraded in today's world.
Not in my house.
Yeah, I was going to say it.
That
and
may
are,
be true.
And we
I'll
are,
grant you that.
And we
However, step into a public school today,
No, I wouldn't dare.
and it's a different world than
Yeah.
everybody in this room grew up in. There's no doubt in my mind about that. None whatsoever.
Although we aren't in the worst place in the world for it, you know.
Oh, absolutely
I mean, like
not.
I was not in Georgia either. It's a very patriotic state, and so is New Hampshire in most rural communities.
Absolutely.
But I was going to comment on this because I think it's true of all wars, that politics aside, it always comes down to buddy versus buddy, and the stories that are built. That, you know, the story about the leeches. It's just great, and it's what they remember, and it's a legacy that's obviously continuing with them now. That they're now back, and they still have that bond that nobody understands except somebody else who's been through it. And
2 years ago, I drove to Tennessee to visit a guy that I served with at the Marine Corps, and he didn't know I was coming. I had set it up with his wife. And when I got off my motorcycle, when I pulled in the yard, him and his brothers got up, like, who's this guy? And when I took off my helmet, he knew exactly who I was. And we spent 3 days together like we'd never left each other.
That bond is there, even though, you know, once again, I didn't serve in combat. And I'm sure, Durwood, you could speak to it. You must still have association with guys that you serve with.
It's interesting how, you know, now with the internet, you know, I've gone out
Huge.
and searched, you know, people down. In fact, there's group sites out there, and in this case, it's all guys who were in the Naval Security Group, and I'll find them, and you know, give them a call, and you know, we had nicknames, you know, for each other.
Yeah.
And we had, you know, certain things that we had these security badges.
Sometimes it's the only way you know it. The only way they can tell who you are.
Yeah.
You tell them what your real name was. In the military, you never use first names. It's always your last name or a nickname.
Yeah.
So you'd be like, hey, remember me, Mike Dempsey? And he'd be like, I'm not sure. And they call me Spike. I used to work. Oh, yeah. Oh, I know who you are now. Yeah.
Exactly. They would nickname you, and that would, and that's the only place that you ever had, you know, that name. And some of the idiosyncrasies, you know, of the individuals that you remember, you know, like forever.
But a good film. Interesting.
I love the message that it's helpful to relentlessly do good things for other people if you're having problems yourself. My 29-year-old son came home at Christmas in terrible shape. He has all kinds of vices. He's a mess. And I just kept saying to him, start doing things for somebody else other than yourself, and you'll pull out of this. And it's taken months, but it's beginning to happen. And I bet you see it with
I tell people all the time, I'm just working links off the chain.
Right.
Great phrase.
I
Yeah.
think of Bob, you know, the old
Oh, yeah,
Scrooge film,
Bob
Bob Marley with all the
Yeah.
chains. Everything I do for somebody else today is just taking links off the chain.
And I think Stray Dog
'Cause
felt
I
that
got
way.
a lot of chains.
Well, and I'm sure you also, as you know, associate with other people, you realize, how lucky you are, even as you,
Oh, yeah.
you know, in what you've gone through, because there's somebody else who's just
Yeah.
so messed up that, it's beyond imagination as to how they got, that far out of kilter.
You know, you touch on that, you know, the percentage of homeless veterans is another travesty, for lack of a better term. And in a lot of instances, that homelessness is a direct result of the traumas that they suffered due to their service. And it's as Mike has alluded to or come out and said, it's a failure on our part. And really our part. We can blame the VA, we can blame Washington, but it's really our part. It's a failure on our part to ensure that they're properly cared for.
But,
You know, whose government is it? At the end of the day, whose government is it?
it belongs to all of us. In trying to understand, there are some people who, I knew one fellow who, tends to look at things sort of simply, and he's, was downplaying the idea of PTSD. He said, well, look at them guys in World War II, they never came back with PTSD.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
And exactly, we had, over in Charlestown, we had this old guy named Sargent, and he, was so PTSD traumatized, that he kind of talked sometimes sort of gibberish, and he was a likable guy, everybody liked him, but they all thought that he was crazy.
People, the World War II generation, the soldiers who fought that, and the men and women who went to World War II were coming out of the Great Depression. They already knew hardship. They knew what it's like to have to go through adversity and survive, and they had a skill to build on when they came back, and they came back with the intention of forgetting the war, starting their life and building on. You go through the baby boomer generation, kids my age, we didn't have those hardships growing up, because our parents did everything for us that they didn't get from theirs. And then, I even look at my own kids, you look at the things that they have access to and that they didn't have to work for, and you wonder why now maybe the kids come back more traumatized, because they
Good
didn't
point.
have the hardship going, they never drank out of the hose and rode a bike without a seat, or
The kids of our
you know what I mean?
generation-
I've done all the things that we did as kids.
Yeah.
But, now you can't send your kid out on a bicycle without knee pad, shin pad, elbow pad, chest plate, helmet. I mean, they look like cyber warriors riding down the road, and let the kid skin his knee for crying out loud, That's just something I think about. They just don't have the adversity to go through,
It's the generation of they all get a trophy. Everybody's a winner, nobody's a loser, and that's not reality.
You
That's
talk
so
all
far
day
from
about
it.
that stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think it's good to have, a film like this that it's in Missouri, which there's some pretty poor areas, in that part of the country, and
That
probably.
was self-evident right there.
Yeah, and, probably, maybe one of the only reasons that this guy could afford to buy a chunk of land and help out, veterans like that. I mean, that piece of land in New Hampshire would cost what, and he probably
Yeah.
paid a fraction of that for it.
I'm
And
sure.
is able to, charge the guys, who knows, a few bucks to.
What did he say, $199?
$199
per
and 10
month?
cents
Yeah.
a month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, there's some, and I was thinking about that, about the hardship of a veteran, when winter comes, what happens to a homeless vet? Yeah, I had
They
one
get
time.
frostbite.
Yeah, there was I was at a Rotary meeting and, up in Bow, and this fellow came in the door. We were just setting up for the meeting, and wanted to know if he could use the telephone. And so I said, yeah, sure. And, he said, do you have a directory? And I said, well, where do you need to call? And he said, well, I just need to get a taxi. He says, I need to go to the vet's,
VA?
in the hospital in Manchester. And so I said, well, come on, I'll take you. And so anyhow, we went down the road, and he said, I slept out on the lawn last night. My sister kicked me out of the house. And then, he basically, told me, his whole story, and that, he needed to get down there and get his next, medication, for the mental, illness situation, that he had. And, it was pretty tough, because he didn't have anybody else. And, when I dropped him off, I said, can I, go in with you? He said, no, he said, I know where to go. But when I left, I had to, pull over to the side of the road, because I'm going like, what's gonna happen to him? You know, and I wonder how many guys there are out there like that.
That seems like a gloomy place to end it.
True. But, yeah,
Roadkill.
reality though.
Roadkill.
Reality
It is reality.
perhaps cause us all to think a little more deeply on the subject.
Do you know any places that people could support if they have those concerns? I know about Liberty House in Manchester, that takes, like, we gave my dad's, I just moved my parents into assisted living, and we gave tons of my dad's clothing that was in perfect condition to them, and they took it.
Another one that comes to mind is Harbor Homes in Nashua.
Harbor
Harbor Homes.
Harbor Homes. Yep,
in
in
Nashua.
Nashua. That accepts donated goods such as that. I don't know.
They all take donations, I'm sure, monetary
Of
donations
course.
too.
Of course. Geez, I don't know. Off the top of my head, those are the two.
Those are the two biggest ones around here.
Yeah.
There's two huge there's a huge veteran center in Lawrence and Lowell area too, that we help out once in a while. We do their Christmas dinner for them and stuff. They take donations. I can't remember it off the top of my head. But up around here, that's most of them.
So we'll all go out reinvigorated for the cause, right?
Right.
Hoorah!
And there's a good chance that Red River, we have a movie on homelessness coming, it's Richard Gere, we'll see. But we've considered doing it on Veterans Day, because that is an issue. The last time that I tried to get somebody here from Liberty House, they don't have the staff to do it. They could probably use a volunteer of somebody who was willing to be an outreach person for them, because they didn't have anybody they could send.
There's another place that will take donations too at the Veterans Hospital. They have a program there called the VASH program. It's the Veterans Housing Assistance Program, and they'll take clothes, furniture, anything that somebody would need to set up a new apartment, because they take homeless vets and put them in a system, or new vets coming back that don't have any resources, and they put them in a training program where they actually end up getting an apartment. And we do a lot of donation stuff for them. I forgot all about them. It's called the VASH program. It's right in the Manchester VA.
Well, that's good. Thank you, the three of you, for coming.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yes, you're welcome.
Anything